Thank you, everyone. Thank you for everyone for coming out tonight virtually. I'm Josh Christie, and I'm a partner at Print a Bookstore. Just a few housekeeping details here at the start before we start our event. If you have any questions tonight, please feel free to enter them in the chat box on the bottom right or in the Q&A function, which is on the bottom bar of the Zoom window. And if you'd like copies of any of Alex or Preeti's books, we will include a purchase link in the chat box. But now, of course, for our speakers tonight. Alex Segura is an acclaimed writer of novels, comic books, and podcasts. Among his projects are the Pete Fernandez mystery series, the superhero noir The Black Ghost, and the YA music series The Archies. By day, he is co-president of Archie Comics. His most recent book is Star Wars Poe Dameron Freefall. Preeti Chhibber is a YA author, speaker, freelance writer, and great friend of mine. She has written for Sci-Fi, Book Riot Comics, The Nerds of Color, and The Mary Sue, among others. She's the author of 4 books, most recently contributing to Star Wars, The Clone Wars, Stories of Light and Dark, and authoring Star Wars, A Jedi You Will Be, which will be released next week. Please join me in virtually welcoming Alex and Preeti. Take it away.
Hello. This is happening now. I don't think I realized when the switch was flipped, and I was just still in like pregame mode. But
no, it was good.
Ready.
You're like, it's happening.
Yes, it is happening. So this is kind of surreal that we both have Star Wars books that came out like 2 months apart.
Yeah, it's weird, right? Because we're huge dorks.
Yeah, we're just like huge nerds. We have a Spider-Man podcast. We talk about Archie and crazy things. Like, we've known each other a long time. So this was like a no-brainer to do an event together. First of all, how are you doing in general with the world?
Let's not start on a downer. No, it's fine. It's compartmentalizing.
I mean, before book release is a pretty stressful time.
Yeah, it's one of those. So Jedi You Will Be comes out next week, and I don't think, time is kind of fake right now because every day feels exactly the same as the one before it. So
right.
All of a sudden you're like, oh, it's June, and then it's August, and then I think I said to you like a couple days ago, I was like, we have an event this week. We got to figure this out.
Yeah, and I don't want to seem like the grizzled old pro, but I was like, yeah, we'll be fine. It'll be what it is. Like, it'll be like, you just kind of get used to, and we know each other. This is not like it's not like you're talking to a stranger, but I want to know like how this came together, because mine, I think we both have like Star Wars origin stories, but I want to hear yours, and then I'll share like how I kind of fell into Yavin 4.
Yeah. So mine was that, aforementioned huge dork, which means I like to talk about things I like.
Yeah.
And that's kind of my brand, is being excited about stuff on the internet. Like, that's what I do. And so Lucasfilm and their publishing group reached out to me and were like, do you want to meet? And this was Comic-Con last year. Oh my God, thinking about like the crowds and all of that.
Not for
and
a
it
while.
was it was absolutely wild. So they were like, do you want to meet? Like, we have these potential projects we want to talk to you about, which I was like, and then I got to Comic-Con. I broke my foot within like 3 hours of being there. I fell off a scooter.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh,
so I was like, I didn't know it was broken until after Comic-Con. So at the time I had a cane, and I was like trying to get through the crowds to meet Jen Heddle, who is the editor of the Clone Wars anthology, at the Lucasfilm booth at Comic-Con. I was like, I'm gonna be late. I'm never gonna make it.
That's so stressful. Oh man.
But then it was like a really good meeting, and so she told me about the anthology that they were thinking about doing, and I was like, yes. And she was like, also, I have a colleague, Kaylin Kennedy, who wants to talk to you about a potential picture book. Which I was like, well, I've not written a picture book, but that sounds very cool.
Yeah.
And then it all kind of came together at the same time within like 2 weeks of each other. Jen was like, who do you want to write? I was like, Anakin. I want to write Anakin. I want to write that angsty, like, trash Jedi. It's like, I got to do it.
Yes. Emo trash Jedi. Yeah.
Yes. I'm just so sad. And I just love how sad that story is. So I was like, I want to write Anakin. And then the picture book, they were like, it's going to be Yoda's perspective, teaching Luke how to be a Jedi in Empire. And I was like, 100%, like, Luke Skywalker is my baby boy. Let's do it.
Yeah. It all worked out, and here we are.
And here we are. But what about you? Like, how did they approach you for Poe Dameron? Like, how did that end up happening?
Yeah, it was interesting because I've known Mike Siglain a long time. We worked together at DC. He edited, 52, when Steve Wacker went to Marvel, Siglain took over 52, and we kind of bonded in the trenches there. Like 52 was like this big weekly series that DC did forever ago. Anyway, so we've known each other a long time, and he reached out, and it was a very vague email. He was like, "Alex, would you ever consider doing some Star Wars?" Which to me could mean a million different things, because and that's not a boast. I just do a lot of different stuff. Like I edit, I write. I in a past life I did marketing and publicity, and so I was like, yes. I just said yes. I was like, the world will work itself out. And I think what happened is I had just announced that the Pete books were ending, and so my series was ending. And I hadn't really said what I was working on next. So then he said, we need a Poe Dameron YA novel. We want to talk about his origin. And Poe is like my guy, like of the sequel trilogy, he's my favorite character. And I feel like of all the Trinity introduced in the sequel trilogy, his backstory was the least explored. We got a sense of what he did right before Force Awakens, but not like where he was from. So there was a lot of like fertile territory. And then I got on the phone with Jen Heddle, and she kind of talked about it. And I said, I'm easy to deal with. This sounds great. Like,
I'll do whatever you want. Let me write this book.
yeah. Just tell me what to do. And then the experience, I think the runway is maybe a little bit longer because it's a novel, but it was still a pretty tight turnaround because it was like, they needed it done before Rise of Skywalker came out, to start prepping it and everything. And so I think I went in thinking that it would be much more stringent. Like, you play with other people's IP. It's very, sometimes you never know. It's either going to be like, you have to do this, or you can kind of do what you want. And it was very liberating. So it was really cool to just be able to play in that sandbox. And to me, it's such a definitive character and such a definitive story. So I was excited to like, oh, and if you hear screaming, it's just my children. They're fine. They're okay. There's adults with them, but kids tend to scream at that age. But so that was the launch. And what was the process like for you? Since it was your first picture book, and then you did some prose too. So like, what were the differences in both journeys, I guess?
So it was interesting because I did Peter and Ned's prior to that. That was my other than my anthology story for 1,000 Beginnings and Endings, Peter and Ned's Ultimate Travel Journal, which is like an illustrated middle grade. But
which is awesome.
It's a fun book. It's a really fun book. Yeah. But that was like learning how to pair like illustration notes and text, and like working through a manuscript in a very like different sort of format than prose. Yeah. And the picture book was like a whole other ball game. I like wrote it out, and then at Kaylin's suggestion, literally like cut out all of the lines and put them on pieces of paper, and like in my room like mapped it out. So there's just
cool.
Right? Because it could like moving lines from page to page and figuring out what the best flow was for like this, however many pages picture book, to make sure the lines made sense with my illustration notes for Mike. Mike Dees, who illustrated the book beautifully. Was a very different experience than like sitting down and writing a short story, which you're just sitting at your Word document and like getting all the words out there onto the page. There's not necessarily a sense of making sure where the page breaks are. That is very cool, and that is somebody's job. It's less so than with like the picture book. Right.
Did you something I do with comics sometimes, because I'm like I can be a rudimentary artist. Did you like draw out what you thought should happen with each page?
I imagined it, and then I wrote it down, because I am not a good artist. Like,
no, I am not good by any means, but I can at least like kind of rough out like but you never want to go to an artist and be like, here, do this. You definitely want to let an artist like be an artist. Yeah.
I can't imagine. Like my notes, there's these great like creatures that Mike has created in this book, and my notes, I went back and looked to kind of compare, and my notes were like, a little creature goes here, might look like a quokka.
Do your thing.
Go.
Make your magic. One of the fun things for me was the research part, because obviously we're both Star Wars fans, and like it's been, you know, one thing that you always get asked is like, what's your first experience with Star Wars? And what I always say is I don't know a world where I didn't know Star Wars.
Same.
You know, like, and I think maybe the trilogies we connected, like, I don't want to assume, but for me, it was like Empire. Empire was the first like movie I remember as a kid, that Darth Vader, Luke Skywalker scene. And then Jedi was the first one where I was like really tied into the plot as a kid. I was like, I like the Ewoks and these are cool. Like, I will not stand for Return of the Jedi haters. Even though I know you're out there, please do not engage in this conversation. But what kind of research did you do for the book? Like, did you just, you know, I'm just not there for that. It's not my thing.
I watched the training sequences from Empire like 100 times. I like just watch those sequences over and over, trying to pull up because you know, this book is for kids, it's for little kids, but you still want to get across what is so wonderful about those sequences, which is Yoda's discussion of the Force and applying those lessons to how you live your life. And so trying to distill that into language that's appropriate for like K1, like kindergarten, first grade, was a really interesting experiment, and took like rewatching Yoda talking. Also getting the cadence of Yoda's speech was an interesting adventure.
I think you're up for the challenge. I'm sure you did fine.
It's fine. Did you go back and read all the Poe Dameron comics?
I did.
They're so good.
Which was cool. You know, and it was, it's interesting because Phil Noto did the cover of the book, and Phil did I think obviously they picked him because he did the Poe comics, but I've known Phil for such a long time. And so it was like such a dream to have Phil draw the cover. But yeah, I mean, I read all the Poe comics. I watched all the movies again, including the prequels. And then I kind of cherry picked the books that I had enjoyed. And also to kind of get a sense of the new canon, I read stuff like the Chuck Wendig books, Phasma, Resistance Reborn. And a lot of it I was doing while I was writing, which I normally don't do. Like, I don't read crime fiction when I'm writing crime fiction because I don't want like somebody else's voice in my head. But I think something Star Wars publishing does really well is that every author sounds completely different and in a cool way. Like, their voice fits the kind of story they're trying to tell. So I think a lot of the reason, and I'm just presuming now because that's what I can do, a lot of the reason they picked me was because I write crime novels. And so they wanted this to really feel like a gritty, like underworld take on the Star Wars universe. Like, there isn't a lightsaber in the book. It's very much a different kind of Star Wars story. But I also wanted to get that pacing. And I wanted to really write it like a movie felt, you know, with the same, like, you know, you can almost visualize the little, you know, the circles kind of fading in and out, and that vibe, that kind of arc that you get from the films. I hope. I mean, I don't want to sound presumptuous, but that's what I was going for, to like really evoke that, but also tell a different kind of Star Wars story. But yeah, the research wasn't work. I mean, I don't do like homework research. Like, yeah, I mean, it's just like, it was awesome. Like, I went to go see Rise of Skywalker, which gave me like 2 hours away. And this was in the before times, but it was nice to sit in the theater and be like, okay, all the questions coming out of this movie like are going to lead right into this book, which was insane.
I mean, that's exciting, right? That's an exciting space to be in.
Yeah, no, I mean, totally. You're wondering who Zori Bliss is. You're like, what? He was a spice runner. And just all the questions raised are about Poe. And so you're going to watch the movie, and then the book is there to answer those questions. So that was a lot of pressure, but it was also really exciting. Like, you know, so, what
was a comment you got from your edits that made you laugh? Like, what is a very Star Wars specific kind of edit you got?
Oh, I mean, it was two things. There was one thing that Jen laughed at, and I felt so proud because she's such an even keel editor. So when you get like a positive reaction, you almost want to, you know, I was like, oh yes. And it's a line, I'm not spoiling anything. It's a line, and we talk about it's Zori and Poe's origin. Basically, you're learning who Zori is. And it's a line where Poe and Zori are in this firefight, and they get out, they survive, and they catch up with someone. And Zori asks about Babu Frick. But you don't know, like, Poe doesn't know who Babu Frick is. And at this point, Poe is kind of, you know, he doesn't know how he feels about Zori yet, but there's obviously a connection there. And he gets this pang of jealousy, like, oh my God, she cares about this Babu Frick guy so much. And she just like, I don't know if she typed out LOL, but it definitely like made her laugh. And one of the other notes that she gave that was super helpful is we have a droid that plays a big part in the book. And she's like, can you just not make it like the sarcastic British droid. Like make it a female and make it like a nice happy droid. And that I think changed the whole vibe of the book. Like you have this EV droid that is just very cheerful and she just wants to help and she's like such a team player, and it was a great suggestion, and I have to give her credit for that. But what was the editing process for you, like, in terms of the story group and everything else?
It was fun, for the Anakin short story. One funny note was like, you can't use glass or something like that. Like I had the word, right? It was like things like that where there was like, there's no glass. You can't use the word glass here.
Oh yeah, with doors, like
yeah.
I think I said, and the door swung open, and they were like, doors don't swing open in Star
right.
Wars. I was like, that's true. Like it's such a like second nature, because in a crime novel, you're like, the door swung open and he came in shooting, but
you're like, no, the door went.
Yeah, the door hissed open and shooting started.
But it was things like that, right? It was those like little minor things that you don't necessarily think about as existing or not existing. They're just commonalities. Because like when I think about Star Wars, sometimes I'm always like, when Han says, "I'll see you in hell," and I'm like, what does hell mean in the Star Wars universe? Like, what is
exactly
the concept of hell like?
Yeah, it was interesting. And those little things are easy fixes, but it's like, that's what definitely reminds you you're writing in a whole different like world.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk a little bit about like fandom and how obviously Star Wars has been ever present for both of us, but what was the moment for you where you were like, independent of pop culture being everywhere, like when did you realize this is the thing for me? Like I'm a passionate Star Wars person.
I genuinely like cannot remember, because it's like one of those things is like, I think probably very similarly, like grew up in similar times. And so when the movies got re-released into theaters in 98, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
97, 98, something like that.
It was like in the lead up to the prequels. Right?
Yeah. They re-released the movies into theaters, and they came out with all the new toys and the Nintendo 64 game, which is amazing. So it's kind of that resurgence of content, for lack of better phrasing. Like I can remember
upticking content.
I know, but like when I can remember watching like a special on a behind the scenes like Star Wars for when they were re-releasing the movies onto VHS and those like really fancy box sets. Remember, you could have like the gold one that had Vader on it, or like whatever, and watching it then, and I was like very young at the time, and it was just kind of being enamored with every piece of it. Like I had like lightsabers and all of that stuff.
Nice. Yeah, I feel like every trilogy has a different like moment for me. Like obviously the original trilogy was, we were kids and it was just like this larger than life thing, and that pulls you in. But I remember when the prequels came out, and it was just like there was this hunger for like new content. And I was so excited. I remember waiting with my buddies like on opening night for Phantom Menace, and just watching the scroll and just being like, we're back, it's happening again. And then the sequel trilogy, it's such a, I think, it's easy to feel spoiled because there's so much stuff. We have the movies, we have The Mandalorian, we have so much great like novels and books, but even that, just seeing like my son connect to it, and he's 4 or he's going to be 5, and like playing with his little Rose Tico and Rey toys, and it's like, okay, this is going to continue, and it's interesting. But can you just give us like the big picture of what your story is in the anthology, just so people can get a better sense of what?
Yeah, I mean, for my story, it's the Clone Wars anthology is retellings of Clone Wars episodes, and Clone Wars and Rebels are the animated Star Wars series, which are like, Rebels is like perfect storytelling. I think those 4 seasons of Rebels are just like perfect Star Wars storytelling and what the potential can be. And I think Clone Wars exists in this space that really, really complements the prequel trilogy super, super well. And so my story is the hostage crisis episode from season 1, and it's all from Anakin's perspective. So he doesn't know what's going on with Padme, and she has his lightsaber, and there's like so much suspense and action and romance and drama, and I love it. I was like, yes.
That's great. I did an event, your ears were probably ringing, because I did an event with Kate, who obviously wrote Queen's Peril, which is fantastic, and we were just talking about how excited we were that you were in the anthology, and I was like, we're doing an event next week. We're like best friends.
No big deal.
Yeah, we're just rolling, doing our Star Wars thing. But what other pinch me moments did you have in this process, like for both books, like when you were like, this is actually happening? I think for me it was like, it didn't really feel real, but then you know, Finn tweeted about it, or he like Instagrammed about it. Like I was like, oh, this is a book that exists, because it's so strange in these pandemic times. Like I couldn't walk into a bookstore and be like, there's my book, you know, which it's a bummer, but then it gives you this surreal sense of like, is this really happening, or did I just write this and like vanity print it? Like, you know, but you know, it was moments like that, and then people taking pictures of the book and getting the book. So you're going to experience that soon, or you have already probably, but it's kind of surreal.
It's very strange, right? Like this was, I had 3 books come out this year within like within like 2 months of each other, basically.
Yeah.
And this would have been, and it was all supposed to happen during convention season. Like there were all these moments missed. So like, I'm with you. Like it feels very, like every book release day has been kind of like, okay, like same as the day before. Yeah. Exactly. It's like, yay, some tweets and Instagram, but it's not quite the same, but there's still like, you know, that moment where I got my author copies in the mail and I opened the box up and it's like this beautiful book that has my name on it. And that's a pinch me moment. Like, even if like I can't go into a bookstore and see it, like it is a real thing that I can hold in my hands, you know?
Yeah, one of the moments for me, which is, it's funny because I mean, I listen to the audio versions of my books a little bit, like to just make sure like the sound is right. And the narrators always do a great job. But Star Wars audiobooks are like next level. Like,
yes, they're like whole productions.
Yeah. And I think I knew that, but then when they did it for my book, I was like, oh my God, like it's like a little movie. Like, and Sean Elias Reyes, who did the Poe book, did Freefall, like he made me rethink about how these characters even look. Like Tommaso, who's like this grizzled spice runner that we meet, and he's kind of like a mentor character to Zori and Poe. The way he was voiced, he sounds like Antonio Banderas, and I was like, oh my God, like it just changes. And so the pinch me moment for me was at the end where he's like, you have just listened to Poe Dameron Freefall by Alex Segura, and I was like, that's me. I did that.
It's so weird. Yeah, they had, for the Clone Wars book, they had the cast of the Clone Wars read the story. So that's Matt crazy. Lanter read the Anakin story, and he said my name, which I isolated from the track. And I 100% I'm going to change my voicemail to like, hi, you've reached Preeti Chhibber.
Yes. Or even just say, bye, Preeti Chhibber. That's it. Yeah, but it was definitely like, that's when I was like, oh, this is real. Like, this is really like a thing. Do you want to talk a little bit about what's next or what you're working on next? Oh, one thing I want to mention is if you have a question, please add it to the chat, and Print is going to run us through the lightning round once we're done, you know, just grilling each other.
Chatting about stuff.
Things that we would say normally, like during a video chat.
I know. Yeah, I guess so. I've got, I had a book come out in August called Avengers Assembly, book 1 Orientation, which was with Scholastic, and is a middle grade novel about Ms. Marvel, Spider-Man, Miles Morales, and Dorian Green, who's Squirrel Girl. And so the sequel to that book comes out in April 2021, and is called The Sinister Substitute.
Usually substitutes are fun. Like you're like, oh God, I don't have to deal with my teacher today.
Not this one.
Not the dun dun.
Dun dun dun. That's the most recent thing. And then there's an anthology that we are both in.
That's right.
Sword, Stone, Table, which is
fun. That was like such a blast. Yeah. Sword, Stone, Table. Yeah. Not
Stone, Sword, Table. I flipped them.
I'm gonna be very upset if we get this wrong.
I know. I'm so sorry, but it's an anthology of Merlin and Arthurian legend retellings.
Yes. Can you talk about what your retelling is?
I don't think we're allowed to.
Yeah. They're very good.
Trust us.
They're very good. Yeah. Did we miss anything about our Star Wars books? I don't want to mispromote ourselves.
If we did, ask us questions about Star Wars.
Yes, ask us questions. We're here. We're here to answer. What do I have coming up next? I'm working on some comic book stuff I can't announce yet, but it's very exciting and it'll be good. And I've got my next crime novel, which is a standalone. It's called Secret Identity, and it's coming out from Flatiron Books. And it's set in comics in the 70s, 1975. So it'll follow a woman moving from Miami to New York, and she ghostwrites a superhero, and it becomes a huge hit. And then her collaborator is murdered, and so she has to then solve the murder to kind of reclaim the character that she created. So it's
so
fun.
good.
It's been a lot of like research, which is again like not research. Like for me, it's like what am I obsessing over, and what will then be my next book. So reading a lot about comic book history and just I'm really fascinated by IP and the idea of like the stories behind like who creates certain characters and what becomes of them. And obviously there's so many tragic stories in comics and in pop culture. And I really wanted to make this so, it's a crime story and a murder mystery, but it's much more about like, kind of standing up for yourself and defining yourself and finding, your ownership, taking ownership of not only your ideas, but yourself. So there's a little bit of that in there. So yeah, I need to finish that book.
What's a really cool tidbit that you've learned in your research on comic book history?
What is a cool tidbit? It's so interesting to see how comic companies evolve. Marvel in particular. And a lot of the original companies in the golden age were really funded by kind of shady businessmen and sprung from the pulps and became these pop culture empires. And so the story, I'm always fascinated by these creators that fall through the cracks that, kind of, either worked at companies that folded and then they faded away, or like, I don't know if that's really an interesting tidbit, but it's much more like the arc of these companies and how they go from being these like very kind of spotty in terms of ethics to being these like really like interesting, squeaky clean IP brands, like these massive IP companies.
Yeah, it is. One of my favorite books is Sean Ho's The Marvel, The Untold Story. It is fascinating. It is such an interesting book to read. And Marvel's history is like this, right?
Yeah.
It's like they have these like high highs and then these like horrible low lows that it is just, I cannot fathom how they've how it lasted, right? Outside of just the sheer power of the stories they were creating and the way, and also the like shady stuff that was happening.
But what's also, that's a great point. And what's really interesting is that there's been many times in comics where people working in comics were like, yeah, this is going to end soon, so I'm just going to ride it out and see what happens next. Like, I think especially like 1975, I think everyone thought comics is just like a short-term thing, and then I'll go write a novel or go write a TV show. And so that's one of the things that we have to also be mindful now. Like, comics will persevere. It just depends on how it's going to be. It'll be a different thing. So I think we should take some questions, I guess, right?
Well, I think we've got I think about 10 more minutes if we want to. Yeah, I think we have about 10 more minutes before we need to take questions, if I'm remembering the timing correctly.
No, you're right. In terms of other going back to Star Wars, which I'm curious, like, what are the other characters that you would want to write, like, aside from, you've hit a lot of the big ones.
I would love to write like a really like sweet YA story about Luke.
That would be good. Yeah.
Right.
Like a prose novel.
Yeah, like a prose novel. I think has the potential to have like just like such a like with like undercurrents, obviously Star Wars style of like what is to come, but just in terms of Luke living on Tatooine as like this like little kid who's just so anxious but wants to be so much more than what he is, I think could be such a fun story to tell.
Yeah, I mean, one of the challenges for Freefall was you want to tell the story of how Poe becomes Poe, but you also want him to be recognizable. And I think, that was the big challenge, was also to like weave in all the stuff that has already been established, but then also make Freefall its own standalone thing. And the best YA stories are about like your emotional journey and discovering yourself and defining yourself. And so, you want people to recognize Poe, but then also see, oh, now that's how he becomes the Poe we see in Force Awakens. But that was challenging for me. I'd love to do a YA Obi-Wan book, like just like, the journey to deciding you want to be a Jedi, and like, because aside from the Skywalkers, and you know, he's such an important player in the whole saga. So, and I just love him. Like, I think maybe it's just being like an impatient dad myself. Like, you see a lot of that, and you know, he's just like, he's got to bring these people along and teach Luke and kind of deal with the own failings he had, like with his own like student that went the wrong way. So I think there's a lot of, you know, weight to that. So.
Yeah, there are these moments. I think the most fascinating character moments are moments of transition, right? They are those moments where they become like, especially when you're kind of in the position of telling stories backwards, which Star Wars is very famously, that's where it lives.
You can enter the mythos at any point. Like some people started with the prequels or started with the sequels. So
yeah, and so it's such an interesting prospect of getting to take on a character and show that point of when they start out as someone unrecognizable and begin to be the person they're going to be. I think is just a really cool space in storytelling, because even when you end it, there's no way. It's like, you know, when you watch something like the prequel trilogy, I think it was a fascinating exercise, because you're like, this can't end well. Like it's going to end badly. We know how it ends, but I'm still going to invest time in learning the backstory and the history of this character.
Right.
And with the Clone Wars, especially, the Clone Wars of like 7 seasons of this isn't going to end well.
Yeah, you know this is going to be bad. Yeah,
you know it's going to be bad, and then you get to the end and it's just, it like obliterates you, right? But it's this wonderful tragedy. It's like a very compelling and like fulfilling tragedy.
For sure. And I think it's also interesting because I talked to Kate about this a little bit at our thing, was you know, sometimes people they understand what's going to happen, but because they're coming in first into something like the prequels, you almost make yourself forget. Like, you know, Anakin in theory is going to become Darth Vader, but then when you see that last scene in the third movie, it's still shocking to you. And that's kind of the power of Star Wars. Just, you know, you can consume it in so many different ways, and you'll feel the story in different ways. And speaking of that, were there novels or books that you read either in the Legends universe or like the expanded universe while you were writing this book that you kind of enjoyed revisiting or for the first time?
I actually went the usual route with that, where I don't like you said, like I don't like to read the things as I'm working on it, because I get worried about hearing it while I'm trying to write. And so I try not to engage with stuff that's like outside of the actual thing that I am working on right then, because it gets too muddled. So like I'll go maybe to like watching the series. Like I think I rewatched a lot of Clone Wars, and I rewatched a lot of Rebels to get into the correct tone and get into the correct sort of like age level style that you want to get to. Because I think that's also key with Star Wars. When you look at who you're writing for is very important, right? When you think about who is the reader going to be for this book, whether it's an adult, a kid, a little kid, and how they engage with the property is very different depending upon where they are in their own lives. And so kind of looking at it, like you said, like seeing the way your 4-year-old reacts to the sequel trilogy and kind of connecting to it on that level and what that means and how you talk to him about Star Wars.
Yeah, it's intense because, you know, after the book came out, I've had people email me and say, I bought it for my 9-year-old. I bought it for my 10-year-old. And I did go in knowing that this was going to be a crime novel, but not the kind, I couldn't write it the same way I would write like a Pete novel. Like, obviously, you know, like Poe is not going to do the things Pete does. Thankfully.
Nope.
You know, thank God. But I still wanted to have that sense of suspense and action. And I think YA, the best YA, you know, doesn't feel like it's written down to somebody. It's not like a watered down. So I did want to, there's violence in there and people, you know, characters die and bad things happen, but it's also written mindfully with the understanding that a lot of younger readers are going to consume this. So that's very true. You have to always keep in mind who's going to be reading your story. Because oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, no, I was going to say, I think because, you know, this notion, I think people do have this notion that younger literature is just watered down adult literature, but it's not, right? It's a very specific perspective on how you internalize what you're reading. And that is kind of where you come at it from. Like, you can still have all these like intense themes and there's like that, we were talking about how you experience and can experience Star Wars in different ways. In the, I think, second to last episode of Clone Wars, you get to see Ahsoka's perspective on Anakin's fall. And it is like heart-wrenching, right? It is like she hears the cry of like Anakin Skywalker after everything happens. And there's, but it is a cartoon that's on like Disney Plus that is for, in addition to the adult Star Wars fans, children to watch. So you can still have all these themes. It's just being conscientious about how you present them and how the kids will engage with them.
Yeah, I was reading this story. I've read it a number of times that Abe Reisman wrote for Vulture, just this oral history of Batman the Animated Series. And they talk about that process. Like, this was envisioned as a show for kids, but we didn't want it to feel like a kid's show. Like, I watched it when I was 10, 11, 12, and then, but I could also rewatch it as an adult. And I think that's a sign of really good storytelling, that it can kind of speak to different age groups. And so with Freefall, I think I wanted to show the complexities of getting older. Like, the relationship with Zori is not one note. Like, I think people maybe were worried, like, oh, it's just an old romance, or it's just like, it's very cliche. And I wanted to purposely write it as like, teenagers don't have simple relationships. You have complicated relationships, especially when there's even an element of romance in there. It's like, it's not like they have adult moments where they can talk about what they're feeling. They don't know what they're feeling yet. So it's, it's trying to be true to that and trying to kind of get back in your head when you were that age and connect in that way as honestly as possible. So writing is hard. that's my big thought for today. But yeah, I think we can take some questions now.
Yeah, sure. I can't remember if Josh was coming back to ask the questions or if we were just going to
I think so, yeah.
Yeah,
there he is.
Hi. So I don't know that we were planning on lightning round necessarily, but we have got a bunch of questions, so we will probably move fast here.
Okay.
Starting with one from Josh at Print, which is there? So I'm currently reading Claudia Gray's Into the Dark, which is part of the forthcoming like High Republic era, and I was wondering if there's an era. So, Old Republic, Rebellion, really any time in Star Wars that you haven't written in yet that you would like to.
I mean, I think I'm so jealous of everyone who's writing for the High Republic stuff because it sounds so cool.
It sounds really cool. I would love, like I said, I'd love to do an Obi-Wan story set before the prequels. So, like, in that space, I haven't played in that space. I mean, I've only written the one book, so.
Like, actually, but I'm here to do more.
Yeah, anything they want me to do, I'll do it.
I know, right?
Yeah, I'm easy. What about you?
Oh, the High Republic. I mean, other than the Luke Skywalker book that I want to write.
Yeah.
Then Kate in the chat had a question about what I always think of as like the EU novels, but I guess now we're called the Legends novels.
Right.
Do you have a favorite character from those stories, from consuming those for the years and years and years that those existed?
I love the Tim Zahn stuff. I mean, that was really the books that moved me as a fan, and so I think Thrawn and that whole world. He basically continued the saga in his novels, which I thought was so amazing. And obviously, a lot of that has been, I don't want to say retcon. It's now a legend. So, but that's the stuff I went back to, when I knew this was happening. I wanted to kind of hit that sweet spot of Star Wars prose.
I didn't read them.
There's still time. You can read them now.
There's nothing but time.
Yeah, I know. I'm reading a lot of books.
Some of the Star Wars video games, right? Did you have any favorite characters from those?
Oh my God, the one that just came out. Wait, I have it sitting somewhere. The Fallen Order, huh?
Oh, nice.
I loved
right?
Yeah. I think he's a great character, but BD1, the little droid, is like my favorite thing on the planet. He's so
nice. I have some obscure like Star Wars game cameos in the book. Like, that was the fun part, like weaving in characters that people wouldn't expect. There's one obvious one that I think it actually earned its own story. Like, people wrote stories about how this character, like this obscure movie character, shows up at the end. But there are other like deep cuts. Like I felt really validated when the story group was like, "Ooh, deep cut." Like I was like,
that is truly the best. Like there was a moment. I have a comment from like Pablo Hidalgo that was like really nice and like story integration because I pulled in from like a different episode and I was like,
yeah. I think Matt was like, "Oh, this is a deep cut," and I was like, "Yes." I don't know if it was a compliment. I hope it was a compliment, but it was definitely like it made my day to feel like, you know, I was blessed by the story group.
Yeah.
So kind of leading out from that, like there's so much interconnected canon and Star Wars media, especially now with video games and comics and, you know, young adult and children's and adult novels. And I was curious that in writing your stories, was there a larger direction that for the future of the universe or the story of Star Wars that was meant to be either your stories were pushed in or were meant to be kind of seeded into your stories, or did you have a lot of leeway to kind of write the story that you wanted to in your books?
Yeah, I mean, there were certain beats that we had to hit. I think, you know, I went in and they said, you know, X, Y, and Z have to happen. Obviously, this is about his time as a spice runner, so you had to talk about that. It was they really wanted to flesh out Zori as a character, but then those are really broad ideas. Like Poe is a spice runner, Zori Bliss, and so I really, when I came into the assignment, I said this could really be a fun heist novel. Like Poe is basically the wheelman getting pulled into a heist, and then he gets pulled out of his comfort zone. And so I was really happy with how freeing the whole process was. I mean, there were moments where they're like, "Oh, we can't use that character," or we're using this character here. But those were so few and far between that it was pretty liberating. And like I was saying earlier, you go into these situations where you're writing other people's characters, you don't know what the threshold's going to be. And right away I could tell that they just wanted me to tell the best story I could. And they would kind of keep me within the space of what they wanted the book to be. So he's gone.
Oh no, Josh left.
Something I said?
Just like, I hate this answer, goodbye.
Yeah, this is so boring. God, IP.
I had a very different experience because mine were both kind of retelling. So it was like kind of pushing as much as I could within the construct that existed pretty heavily was an interesting experience because you're, you know, with the short story, it's all in Anakin's head. So I got to do a lot of parsing through what that meant and defining his reactions, which was really fun because I got to decide. I'm like, this is how he feels.
And it's canon. It's canon.
And it's canon now.
Yeah. I think, yeah, that was one of the coolest things was that, you know, they're always, I felt the story group was really welcoming about, you know, adding new characters, new planets, and new concepts. So I had a blast just creating characters and, you know, and killing characters and like, you know, changing, you know, like there are a lot of characters that you can now look at and read the book and be like, okay, this is part of Star Wars lore. Like, you know, it's such a cool thing, like to be able to not only play with the toys that are there, but then create them and then have
to create new ones.
Yeah.
There is
I'll have to, like the biggest thrill will be like if anyone uses them somewhere else, like that would be a kick.
That would be, I can't even fathom like what that would feel like when you get to be like, I created this thing that is now going to matter so heavily in this other story, you know, and like, that's kind of the fun part of IP. But I was laughing because Zoraida Cordova in her book, in her Star Wars book, named a planet after my last name. And I was reading the book and I was like, wait a minute.
That's
it's like
me.
That's me, like this planet, CHHI.
Yeah, that's the fun part about writing something so long is you can throw in little hat tips to like people. I mean, they're Star Wars eyes, so you know it's not really them, but yeah, it's cool.
It's cute.
Yeah, congrats, you're a planet.
I promise I wasn't ditching you guys. The apparently opening up the question and answer thing to look at questions makes me leave, which seems like great functionality on Zim's part.
Oh, cool, yeah.
In terms of these. But Dave from the chat has a question, which is aimed kind of specifically for Preeti because of her forthcoming book, but for both of you, which is,
I'm going to log
like
off
Yoda?
Wait, what was the question?
do you like Yoda? Because Dave dislikes some of the like suppress emotions, celibate theocracy part of Jedi philosophy. So, like, do you like Yoda, and did writing him give you a different perspective on the character?
Writing him did give me a different perspective, because I absolutely agree that the Jedi have a very flawed. I think it's the problem, right? There is no. They say it themselves, like only a Sith deals in absolutes. So this notion of like the Jedi having these absolute truths that exist doesn't work with their own philosophy. So yes, I think it's a very flawed perspective. And I think Yoda had a lot of flawed decisions that he made, which he recognizes. But writing this book very much put me in a place where it's all the best parts of what Yoda relates to Luke in the movie, which are about the Force, which the Force is very fundamentally founded in a lot of Eastern religions. And so it's something that I recognize very deeply in this notion of like, we're all connected. Like, this is the important thing to remember, of like your actions have consequences, and those pieces of Yoda-ness I appreciate, and Yoda-isms. It's my politic answer.
Good answer.
Thanks.
And Alex, thumbs up, thumbs down on Yoda?
I'm a Yoda fan. I'm two thumbs up for Yoda. I'm pro Yoda.
Proda.
Deep insight. Yeah, I'm Proda.
Sorry.
It's okay. I'm always
Kate,
here for a good
in the chat had another question, which is, does either of you listen to music while you're writing? And if so, what did you listen to while writing these books?
Okay, I do not listen to anything while writing. I just can't, because then I'm a music.
What?
I'm really into music, so then if I'm listening to like a song with words, I start thinking about, oh my God, this is from this album, and then there was this drama, and blah blah blah. You just like it just distracts you. But I do think about the book a lot while listening to music, so I make playlists. For Poe, I listen to a lot of jazz, like a lot of John Coltrane and Miles Davis, and a lot of Star Wars music, just to kind of get into that zone. But for my crime novels, I make really elaborate, like 50-song playlists, like as if I were making a mix CD for somebody. And I mention music a lot in the books because Pete is a big music fan, but it's not a 1-for-1. So if Pete's like, I put on a Nico Case record, that song is not on the playlist. It becomes its own, like, I think about this a lot. So yeah. But I don't listen while writing. It's too distracting.
I go to YouTube and I go ambient Star Wars soundtrack.
Nice. Yes.
And I hit play and then I write, and that's what happens.
Good. That's easy.
Lo-fi study Star Wars beats.
Yes. Yeah. If you look at my like YouTube music searches, it's like lo-fi, ambient. Like, give me I do a lot of film soundtracks, so it's like soft, pretty, like Pride and Prejudice, Amelie, like anything that will just like, quietly sit in my ears and not distract me. I can't listen to anything with words, though.
Yeah, no, it takes me out of it.
Too distracting.
If there was one thing about the lore or canon of Star Wars you could change in order to write a story, from little character things to like something fundamental about the Force, is there something that you would change and be able to write this kind of, Elseworlds alternate story in the world of Star Wars?
What if Anakin never fell?
Yeah, that would be cool.
It's like a fix-it-fic.
Yeah, it would probably be something like, what if this character didn't die? Like, what if Han didn't die? Or something like that, where you could kind of tell one more story. Or that's the stuff that I tend to think about. Like, why was this choice made narratively to end the character's arc? But that's just me second-guessing everybody.
And I've got, for this lightning round thing, we're nearing the end of our time here. So a super simple one from someone in the chat. Across all of Star Wars media, what was your favorite Star Wars moment?
Wow. In what world is that a super simple, oh, you're being sarcastic. Hard. I got it. I'm there. That's so hard. I love the binary sunsets.
Oh, yeah. It's so basic, but it is for me. It's the Luke Vader Cloud City battle. You know, I love when the heroes are at their lowest point, and I love that movie just because it expands the universe. Like you see Star Wars, the original movie, and you're like, okay, this is the box, but then Empire blows it out, and you're like, there's so much more to it. And then it takes all the heroes and drags them to their lowest point, and really leaves you wondering, like, are they going to get out of this? And that to me is like just great sequels. That's what great sequels are. They just kind of pull you down into the abyss, and then that allows for the epic, like, victory of Jedi. So yeah, it's not so much the reveal, you know, obviously that was a cool twist, but I never really got to experience it. It was never a surprise to me, but it's that moment, like Luke gets his hand cut off and he's falling down into this pit. That really resonates with me just as a writer and as a fan.
I think that then in that line in in Rebels, sorry, this might be spoilery, but Rebels has been out for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't mean to spoil that Vader is
yeah,
sorry.
Alex.
Sorry. Yeah.
In Rebels, when Ahsoka meets Vader again for the first time, and they have their showdown, and it's this like sort of similar but the opposite, where it's again, I love the great tragedy of Star Wars. I love the kind of like depth of like despair because there's hope despite it, and I think that's what's so beautiful about it. And that is a moment of that where you have this character who loved her master so much, like Anakin was her brother, and to see what she has to go through in that context is just so heartbreaking, but it's just such beautiful writing.
Yeah.
Well, Alex, Preeti, I think we are at our time here. Thank you.
I think there's
so
actually
much.
there's one question in the Q&A, I think.
Oh,
from Liberty.
that I missed because.
Wait, we can. Oh, it's it's from Liberty, and she asks me, "Who is Darcy's favorite Star Wars character?" Darcy is my dog.
Yes.
He's very cute. I think Darcy's favorite Star Wars character is Baby Yoda.
Smart. Yeah, the child.
They're very similar.
Yeah.
They're cute and furry.
I just wanted to give Liberty a shout out. I'm so glad she's here. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to take the steering wheel from you.
No, please. That's apparently I cannot both look at the Q&A and run this myself. So I appreciate the assist.
Sorry.
This is why you two are the professionals. Preeti, Alex, the books are Star Wars Poe Dameron Freefall, Star Wars The Clone Wars, Stories of Light and Dark, and Star Wars A Jedi You Will Be. Thank you so much for doing this tonight. This was such a delight.
Thanks for having us.
Oh, thanks for having us. This was awesome.
This is fun.
And we only mentioned Spider-Man 1.
I know.
This was cool. Thank you so much. And yeah, please support your indie bookstore. It's a troubling time, so we got to support the stores that push our books. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Everyone have a great night. Thank you so much for coming.
Take care.